Hey everybody, my name is Steve, and I'm going to talk to you today about some tips for interviewing for software jobs. And the context of this is that one of my friends on Zulip lives in India, and he is preparing for placement season, which is basically, I think Americans would call it like interviewing season. Um, I don't even know what Americans actually call it, but when you're at the university level and looking to get your first job out of college, you'll go through this interview process. And I asked Brij Mohan to give me a couple bullet points of what I should talk about. And I'm actually going to talk about them in kind of reverse order here. He says about my journey. I've been developing software for 35 years, if you include like high school, and I've been in the field for 30 years. I got my first job out of college. I graduated from Duke University in 1989, and I got an offer from Oracle. They did an on campus interview with me, and I was able to get through that. And then I did the phone screens, and then they flew me out to California from North Carolina, which is like 3,000 miles away. And even if I hadn't gotten the job, I would have had the opportunity to at least like see what California's like because I had never been that far west before in my life. So there's obviously tons of incentive to prepare yourself as well as you can for the interview process, even if you don't have a 100% success rate. You can get some really good experience from at least getting past the first round. I've gotten past the first round for four major U.S. companies that I think people in India will have heard of. I already mentioned Oracle. I was hired by Amazon in 2007. And again, I had to pass some phone screens, and then they flew me out to Seattle. At the time, I was living on the East Coast, and I had friends in Seattle. So even if I hadn't gotten the job, I would have gotten a free trip to Seattle, and I did visit with friends while I was there. But they hired me, and I ended up working there a couple of years. I also got through the first round of interviews with Microsoft, and again they flew me out to Seattle. They ended up rejecting me, and the reason they rejected me is I just failed miserably on one of the coding questions, and that'll be something that we'll talk about in the next bullet point. I also was already had a job offer in hand, so I didn't prep as hard for Microsoft as you might think, and I didn't actually want to work at Microsoft. And then finally, I've gone through the Google interview process a couple times. They've flown me out. They flew me out one time to San Francisco, and then the other time I was already living in the Bay Area, so I didn't get the free flight from them. But that interview process was very helpful. I got rejected once because I was a bad fit, and I got rejected just like they were interviewing me to be DevOps, and I'm not really a DevOps person. I'm more of a pure software developer. And then the other time they interviewed me pretty soon after I acquired YouTube, and I did really well in the interview. They deliberated for a long time because they didn't get back to me in a week. And the last question that they asked me was a very deep question about software architecture that I think I did okay on, but I wasn't very convincing. And at that point, they were interviewing me for a pretty senior position. Um, and then I've also gotten jobs at several American companies that you will never heard of that paid pretty well. I've gotten some, uh, you know, I've gotten to interview with some companies that ultimately didn't hire me, but at least I got to, see what their campus was like and learn some stuff. But I've actually done pretty well throughout my career. Now I could talk forever about my journey, but I'm going to go to the second bullet point, which is what should be bare minimum things that the interviewer will expect of you. So I've not only been on your side of the process, but I've conducted tons of interviews for potential candidates, particularly when I was working at Amazon and when I was working at Dropbox. Um, we were Both companies were really aggressively trying to hire people from all over the world. And so it was part of every software developer's responsibility to at least do a couple phone screens per week. And often you would uh, do interviews where the candidate came to visit the office. And I can tell you that the number one reason that candidates don't get past the first phone screen is that they can't demonstrate competency in very simple, not very simple, but in relatively simple programming tasks. So I'm going to show you my interview prep repository. So at one point when I was interviewing for jobs, I had a lot of experience under my belt, but it had been like 20 years since I was at the university. And a lot of the questions that they ask you in job interviews, like you don't necessarily like write many binary search algorithms in practice. If you ever need a binary search, you probably just find an existing algorithm. But it's just a fact that they have to ask you for something, and there's sort of agreed set of canonical programs that people just expect you to write. And of course, you can find those on services like LeetCode. When I was writing these examples, I was using something very similar to LeetCode that I don't remember, but it's not hard to find websites that just give you typical interview questions. And so let me go through this here to show you some of the things. I have definitely either been asked to write anagrams or asked a candidate to write anagrams, or both. So that's like if you go to LeetCode and you see the question about how to write anagrams, then you should make sure that you're confident in writing that. Let's see. Binary search, you absolutely need to learn. And that's a hard algorithm, or that's an easy algorithm to get off by one on. You want to be really comfortable with like edge casey things like off by one errors. Now, if you screw up the off by one, the interviewer will usually say, I think your program is mostly right. What do you think the error is? A good guess is almost always off by one. Breadth first search, extremely important. It's good to practice really simple things like complex numbers. Like just be able to write a really simple class, and there's nothing conceptually difficult about writing a complex number class, but you do want to be like very comfortable with the syntax. You don't want to be stumbling over the syntax of your favorite programming language. And I've probably said this before, but I want to stress that it's a really helpful thing if you're doing practice for interviews, coding practice for interviews. Create yourself a Git repository. Not only does that'll reinforce your Git skills to some degree, although it's pretty basic stuff to create this kind of repository, since you'll be working presumably alone. But then once all of these coding samples are in your Git repository, a couple days before placement season begins, you can review all the examples that you wrote, and you can even put comments in the code samples that you wrote, like difficult, need review, and then you can grep for those. Like let's say, let's go back to breadth first search. I got asked that in one of my interviews, and I didn't remember that the way that you do a breadth first search is that you just create a little queue. And it's not as straightforward an algorithm as like a depth first search. So what I should have done when I was practicing breadth first search is have a repo, and when I failed to do it, look up what the solution is, and then try to write the solution from scratch without seeing the real solution, but then put a little comment in the program that says review. And then you can review that right before your interview. Let's see. I don't see Fibonacci in here, which is kind of crazy, but there's a really good chance that people will ask you to do a Fibonacci sequence. What else? Towers of Hanoi is a really fun program. And that's just basic recursion. You absolutely need to understand recursion. Let's see. Be good to know how to write a heap. You want to know all the basic sorts. You want to know merge sort. You want to know quick sort. You want to know bubble sort. And I forget what the fourth one is. But yeah, you want to be confident in sorts. And I think you get the idea. And I'll try to post this this link to YouTube. Try to remember to do that if you want to quickly peruse my repo. It's all in CoffeeScript. But you can see how thorough I was here 12 years. I guess this is all about 12 years ago. I just had this service where they just ask you to code up a bunch of stuff, and I just coded them. And, you know, obviously not all of these coding questions were asked to me in the eventual interviews, but it gave me a lot of confidence. It looks like I did at least one Python example, or two Python examples, but I was pretty fluent in Python. By the way, I use this as an opportunity to learn a new programming language. You see all these coffee suffixes. Those refer to CoffeeScript, which is a programming language that's like a syntax layer on top of JavaScript. Okay, so that's enough of that. That's the bare minimum thing. Then the final thing that I think you should be prepared for is an understanding that if you're interviewing with a senior person, they really want to have some notion that you're able to think about things in a senior way, and that's like a really intangible thing. And I don't know exactly how you prepare for that, but you want to come across with a certain confidence that you've at least done something outside of the university in terms of building useful software, or even if you haven't really like built any useful software per se, that you have done things like code programming competitions, and that you're genuinely interested in the profession. And of course, if you're not genuinely interested in a profession, then you should reconsider other things that you might like to do better. I think that I'm going to end that for now. There's another question here about, it's actually a question that I posed to Brijmohan, where I think I can provide some advice to Indian candidates in particular about what American interviews look for, but I'll save that for a subsequent video. Okay, that's all for now. I appreciate any comments. I'll try to follow up on any other questions that you have. And also, I always appreciate suggestions for other videos. Thank you. Thanks for listening. Bye.